let me just give you another quick example of positive deviance, at least in the education space. Several years ago, I was part of a team that did a big report on the Middle East, and you know enough surely about the Middle East to know it's not a happy place a lot of the time. And you probably also know that a country like Palestine is perpetually suffering lots of challenges, to put it in the most polite language, right? So you might think that, well, their schools must be really struggling, and they are in most respects for many clear and well understood reasons. But we took this sort of positive deviance idea in this big report we did on public service delivery across the Middle East, and we went to several schools ultimately that were in Palestine and trying to figure out why they were so good. Actually, the test scores that these kids were generating from a poor, isolated rural school in the middle of Palestine was generating test scores that were at the lower end of what the high-income country. So there was something magical going on in this school, and it was really important that we wanted to try and help understand this. And as Sampath was saying before, in large part because most of the narratives that you would think in your head as Indians about Palestine are probably pretty negative, right? They're either victimizers or they're victims. They're either doing awful things to other people or awful things are being done to them. Their schools are terrible. I hope you're also equally not surprised to learn that Palestinian parents actually really care about their kids. They want their kids to learn. They want them to go to a safe school. They want them to grow up and be as good as they can be, like every other parent in the world. And what the parents in this community did was to take a really strong, wow, that was a fantastic lightning strike. Yeah, there we go. This is the revelation I'm about to reveal here. No, it wasn't. The community had a really strong role in the hiring of teachers and asked them lots of questions about their own commitments to their students. And the role of accountability in this particular sense wasn't just to a bureaucrat who had to keep track of attendance, but to the community that would take an active role in looking at and ensuring that the teachers showed up for work every day. The setting of exams, for example, students had to do homework, but the role of assigning homework and for setting when the exams were going to happen, all put back to the students. You decide when you know the importance of these exams, but you decide when is the best schedule, and you recognize that other kids have got to take exams in different subjects. You do the work of learning how to structure and sequence an exam program so that you can all be part of this and not stressed out about the additional work. So all that responsibility of seemingly routine sort of school tasks was given back to students themselves, right? And it was amazing what they were able to do just by giving back a lot of the responsibilities back to the students themselves. On this homework question, on that fishbone diagram that you saw before, one of the reasons why kids aren't learning to read or write because when they go home from school, their houses are too small and they've got young kids running and babies screaming and they just can't do their homework. That's a familiar situation. So what did they do? What did the community do in that situation? They said, well, for an hour a week, we as parents are going to commit to keeping our houses really quiet for 1 hour between 3:30 and 4:30 every day. Our house is a quiet zone. So all the other parents would take all the other kids into a public space and they would look after them for that 1 hour just so that their kids who had homework could do so in quiet, right? And they came up with that idea. No education expert flew in at $1,000 a day and decided that, hey, I have the answer to your problem. It's called communities taking responsibility for their kids and allowing the space to grow for your child to come up and do their homework. So those are the kinds of things that happen when you look for positive deviance. You figure out who's already solved this problem, who's come up with something you never would have thought of with your nice fancy education degree for how to solve those kinds of problems. And that's when your job as a public servant becomes a very different kind of job, right? You're not just keeping the Excel spreadsheet flowing. You're trying to understand this big variation. So in the 6,400 villages you've got here, learning how to understand why all these really hard problems manifest themselves in the different kinds of outcomes and understanding why and how and where they become those kinds of outcomes can be a really good first step in being able to then apprehend what the range of problems are and then potentially what the types of solutions might look like. Okay, so in this space, you've now analyzed your change space, you've thought about what you might be able to do, and you've decided that you have adequate authorization, you have adequate ability, and you have adequate acceptance. You want to move forward. But you're taking one first step. And the essence of a complex problem is you probably can't figure it out unless you're a genius right from the get-go. The solution will emerge. What becomes the solution has to be given a chance to become what it's going to become. And so here, this is the iterative and the adapting cycle in the next phase of PDIA, which is summarized pretty simply as just do something and then get some feedback. Just do regular check-ins to be able to get a sense of what's going on. And then make the necessary adjustments to all of that, adapt it and adopt it to the very specific circumstances. It probably won't end up just being a copy, a cut and paste, as it were, from one context to another. There'll have to be some adjustments made. You probably won't know what those adjustments are when you start. But trying it out, within a week or so, you should be able to get some initial sense of, that idea we heard about from Palestine about setting up setting up safe spaces for kids to do their homework. Turns out to be completely implausible in our place. We have no public spaces where kids can actually run around. It's just not going to work. Okay, sounded great at the time. You've learned something. But you've got to go through that cycle of trying out something, having regular check-ins, regular feedback mechanisms to try and enhance that. Right? Now, this is where the M part of monitoring and evaluation then becomes really crucial. Right? All of our work in the public sector, certainly in the World Bank, has a budget code assigned to monitoring and evaluation. And we'll be talking more about the evaluation stuff tomorrow. But the monitoring part, I think, is where there's a real revolution needing to happen. We need to be much better at being able to look at what we're doing in real time and not seeing it as evaluation, not seeing it as compliance, not seeing it as disciplining people, but as learning, as a way of getting a better, richer, more practical understanding of what's working and what isn't. Doing that as routinely as part of your work program is the way in which you'll eventually figure out how to customize and find and then customize the response that you need. So one way, I love this example. You surely recognize, well, they're listed on the screen, but one of these guys won a Nobel Prize for economics, right? Amartya Sen, in the world of development economics, sort of a godly figure. One day he and Ravi Shankar were having a discussion about whose kind of skills were the hardest to acquire. Being an elite global Nobel Prize-winning economist or the best sitar player in the world. Right? And when they both won, you know better than I, the name of the medal that they won for the highest medal of honor you can win by the Indian government. The challenge was put to them about, okay, well, who has the hardest skill set? Who has the most complex set of skills to acquire? And Ravi Shankar's beautiful answer to that question was, I have the idea. Amartya will teach me economics for a week, and then he will test me on how much economics I know after a week. And I will teach him how to play the sitar for a week, and then we'll see how good he is on the sitar, and whoever does worst clearly has the hardest skill set to acquire. And the joke, of course, was, and you all laughed, right? Because you think, geez, after a week, I can probably explain what supply and demand is. I can probably understand what trade-offs are. I can probably understand what budget constraints are and utility functions. Like after a week, I'm pretty sure I could get people to have a high school level understanding of basic economics, right? How good do you think you'd be on the sitar after a week? You still couldn't probably even hold the instrument the right way, let alone play Happy Birthday or something like that on it, right? So the point is, you get good at playing the sitar by not being so good at it until you patience and practice and practice and practice until maybe eventually you can play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or something else. And then if you happen to be super gifted and super committed, you end up being a superstar at it. But there's the kinds of work we're trying to elicit here, the sensibility we're trying to acquire, is that organizations acquire those skills in that same kind of way. Being able to ensure that a plane doesn't fall out of the sky is the organizational equivalent of playing the sitar, right? It's just amazing that you can stick a metal tube 10 miles up in the air and fly it at 800 miles an hour across 10,000 miles of open ocean for 25 or 30, 45 years and never have one of them fall out. That's what organizations can do. It's a miracle that you can drink water out of a tap and not get sick. It's a miracle that you can send your kids to school and they can learn stuff that they would never learn otherwise. We should see it that way. It's unbelievable that we can do those things. But you don't learn them just by hearing lectures about it. You don't learn to play the sitar by listening to YouTube videos about Ravi doing his amazing work. You learn it by being awful until you actually get a little better and a little better and a little better. That's how you learn to speak your mother tongue. It's how you learn to speak English so that you can apprehend what I'm doing now. That's the kind of work and the standard and pedagogy that we're trying to introduce into the way in which we think about the public sector, not just as following rules, doing the creative hard work of learning how to build your teams, your organizations, your ministries' capability to play the sitar. Or maybe not that, that's too hard. Maybe just to be able to play the recorder. Maybe just to do something pretty simple, but do it reliably, effectively, at scale, for a long period of time, so that ultimately you create this much bigger and better space. To do all of that, you can, in this check-in and feedback kind of space, you're going to need an array of different kinds of information. The way that most people in this room apprehend knowledge, or the way in which we learn, because we're all university graduates and we're all literate and we all understand basic numbers and all the rest, is all the stuff that's kind of in the space of data and evaluations and research evidence, or maybe coming to conferences like this where we have conversations with peers. That's what we do. That's what professionals do. So that's how we conduct ourselves in a professional space. But I think the essence of doing a lot of the kind of work we're talking about here is that good data is very necessary but very insufficient. Being able to talk to other people is pretty good as well. That's also insufficient. You've got to have an array of different sources available to you. And ultimately, you learn it by doing it. You learn to ride a bicycle, or you teach your kids how to ride bicycles by giving them trainer wheels, and then you take the wheels off, and then you let them run down a hill, and they fall over, and they cry, and you say it's okay, and you try it again, and they still fall over, and you say it's still okay, and then eventually magic happens, and their brain figures out how to stay vertical while they go forward. Right? All of that is feedback. Your brain is learning. Your team has to learn that same kind of way, and so to do this kind of work, you're going to need an array of different sorts. Not everything. You're going to need an array, because the essence of a complex problem is that it doesn't have its pre-existing data set that you can consult to divine what you should do. You might have to create that data. You might have to do lots of conversations with people around these really hard issues that are potentially recorded perhaps, or just are able to be addressed in a more formal report written kind of way. But if you're dealing, as you always and often do, with people that are innumerate and illiterate, who don't apprehend the world through numbers and through written words, right? Insisting that be the tone and terms of our conversation is going to alienate people. You're excluding people, essentially, by insisting that one particular modality of apprehending the world be the only way we apprehend the world. Right? So learning how to engage with people whose points of entry into understanding the world is probably pretty different from what we like to celebrate with our nice university degrees, is a really important part of that. It may mean entering it through popular culture, through the songs, through the poems, through the stories that people tell, through the narratives they have of their own people and how they became who they are. In Australia, our Indigenous people, Aboriginal people, have had such an awful history of engagement with the Australian government, because the Australian government insists on doing all the normal things around technical work. They have a whole long and unhappy history where money isn't the problem, where caring in the abstract isn't the issue, where earnest people are not in short supply. But because the existing system insists on apprehending worlds in terms of numbers, in terms of charts, and in terms of written reports, that is just a parallel universe to the way that most Aboriginal communities actually understand the world. They don't make decisions on the basis of consulting Excel spreadsheets, right? We do, but maybe that's not how other people do it. And when that's the space you're in, that's when the adaptive leadership challenge becomes really strong. You've got to figure out how to reconcile a world that you apprehend through maps, which are, again, representations of reality scribbled on a piece of paper, representing space on a piece of paper, representing data in Excel spreadsheets, numbers representing reality, or words written down in reports that represent reality but are not reality. They're representations of reality. And different groups, especially in the poorest areas and the most isolated and marginalized communities, that apprehension can be done in really, really different kinds of ways. In Australia, the Aboriginal people have a wonderful expression for that. It's called serious white fella stuff, right? Uh-oh, here come the serious white fellas, right? Every year they show up in their white Jeeps. They want to survey us, put us in focus groups, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how awful is your life? And right, you laugh, but you know you're laughing because you know that's a version of that goes on in your own world, right? Once we have the data, then we can rush back to Canberra and we can provide policy advice to a minister who's then going to authorize us to do news. No, serious white fella stuff. Right? You can choose your own pejorative word that you can imagine people might use when you show up in their world. But the essence of doing this kind of work, especially in maternal health, especially in agriculture, right? The space where PDIA has had the biggest traction at the World Bank is in irrigation, actually. Why? Because every group that's ever existed has a pretty good theory about how you deal with what's going on outside right now, right? They do not need civil engineers rocking into their world to tell them how to manage their irrigation field, their rice fields, or anything else. They've done this perfectly well, thank you very much, for hundreds of years, all right? But maybe there is actually a slightly better way of learning how to do this. Maybe. How do you bridge that gap? Well, the best civil engineers realize that their job isn't just to lay pipes. They can do that. That's what they were trained to do. The best civil engineers are recognizing that these pipes have to be maintained. They have to be managed by community associations at different points on a water course who might decide to siphon off water from other people and not from others. And so all sorts of social adaptive problems emerge very quickly just by successfully introducing all the nice new water pipes, right? I can count the water pipes. I can tell you how much they cost. I can contract people to put them in. All that's the normal stuff of doing procurement in public administration. But if the problem is getting water to people equitably, cleanly, reliably, at scale, then just being a civil engineer is necessary but very insufficient for what you need to do. And the PDIA lens provides you with a whole different way of engaging with this. So in a couple of months' time, I'm going to be in the country of Georgia dealing with irrigation questions. I've never been to Georgia. I know nothing about irrigation, but I love it when people recognize that their problem or their skill set that they've got, which is mostly technical and why they were hired to work at a place like the bank, suddenly runs up a brick wall they didn't even know existed because they don't fully apprehend the importance of having these other adaptive kinds of skills to actually solve the real problem that's underlying all of this stuff. So all of this comes back to this really central part about saying part of your job then, as you're getting the feedback and trying out these new ways of doing things, how do you cultivate and curate the normal data that you would be doing, because that's what you do, we all do as researchers or as officials, but how do we understand what other people might think counts as a question and counts as an answer for this? What does a safe birth look like from someone else's perspective, where it's not just counted in the usual ways? What does a good education day look like? What does a good day of having the crops grow reliably look like? And you have your way of understanding that, and they might have theirs. And it's so important that even the thunder gods are acknowledging it. I think I've made my point. All right, thank you.